No alarm would sound. Nothing would collapse. No one would wake up floating. If gravity began to weaken, the first changes wouldn't look dramatic. They would look like inconvenience. You'd notice it in your body before you noticed it in the world. Standing up would feel slower. Not harder, just delayed. Your muscles would still work. Your bones would still hold. But every movement would require slightly more control than it used to. Athletes would complain about off days. Construction workers would feel more fatigue in their joints. Doctors would start seeing more unexplained balance issues. Nothing conclusive. Nothing provable. Gravity wouldn't disappear, it would loosen its grip. Objects would still fall. They'd just fall with less urgency. A dropped phone would take a fraction of a second longer to hit the ground. You wouldn't measure it, you'd feel it. That strange moment where your brain expects impact, and it arrives just a little late. Most people would blame distraction. Buildings wouldn't collapse, but structural tolerances would begin to matter more. Elevators would feel different. Suspended systems, bridges, cables, cranes would sway just a bit more than engineers predicted. Within months, engineers would quietly update safety margins, not because gravity failed, but because models no longer matched reality. The atmosphere would be affected next. Gravity is what keeps air dense near the surface. If its pull weakened even slightly, the atmosphere wouldn't vanish, it would thin. At first, this would feel like altitude sickness without the altitude. More headaches, more fatigue, lower oxygen efficiency. Athletes would struggle to hit previous performance levels. Airplane cabins would feel off, even at cruising altitude. Again, nothing catastrophic, just enough to introduce doubt. Scientists would begin noticing discrepancies in satellite data. Orbital decay rates would shift. Objects that should slowly fall back to Earth would remain in orbit longer than expected. Small errors, the kind that get dismissed as instrument noise. But gravity doesn't only pull things down, it holds everything together. Your organs stay where they are because of gravity. Your blood flows against it. Your posture resists it. When gravity weakens, the body doesn't float, it destabilizes. Over time, muscles would atrophy faster. Bones would lose density even in healthy adults. Physical therapy clinics would see a rise in patients with no clear cause. And still, no one would say the word gravity, because it's not supposed to change. Just like time wasn't supposed to slow. And yet the most dangerous thing about gravity weakening wouldn't be what happens to objects. It would be what happens to trust. Trust in measurements. Trust in models. Trust that the rules we built civilization on are still intact. By the end of the first year, no one would panic. But the world would already be adapting. Quietly. And gravity would already be letting go. Gravity doesn't just keep you on the ground. It keeps the planet organized. As its pull weakened, Earth wouldn't fall apart. It would slowly lose discipline. The oceans would be the first global system to behave incorrectly. Water responds instantly to gravity. Tides are gravity made visible. As the force weakened, tidal patterns would stretch and desynchronize. Coastal regions would experience tides arriving later than predicted, lasting longer, retreating slower. Not floods, not disasters, just timing errors. Ports would report irregular schedules, marine navigation systems would need constant recalibration. Insurance models would quietly update their risk tables, not because storms increased, but because predictability disappeared. Then the atmosphere would follow. Gravity keeps the densest layers of air pressed close to the surface. As its grip loosened, air would redistribute upward. Pressure gradients would flatten. Weather systems would grow larger, slower, and harder to forecast. Storms wouldn't become more violent, they would become more uncertain. Jet streams would drift. Climate zones would blur at the edges. Seasons wouldn't disappear, they would arrive late, leave late, overlap. Agriculture depends on timing more than temperature. Farmers would notice planting windows becoming unreliable. Crops wouldn't fail all at once. Yields would simply fluctuate more than expected. Governments would attribute it to climate variability and move on. But above the atmosphere, the changes would be impossible to ignore. Satellites would begin behaving politely wrong. Orbital paths would stretch. Decay rates would slow. Objects that should re-enter would remain aloft. Collision prediction systems would require constant updates. Space agencies would start burning extra fuel to maintain stability, quietly, because saying gravity is weakening is not a line item you put in a budget report. The moon would respond next. Its orbit would slowly widen. not enough to see with the naked eye, but enough to measure. Tidal locking would weaken. The delicate gravitational conversation between Earth and Moon would lose tension, and with it, long-term stability. Earth's rotation would begin to drift. Days wouldn't suddenly change length, but the margin that keeps our timekeeping stable would erode. Leap seconds would become harder to predict. Atomic clocks would disagree with astronomical observation. For the first time, time and gravity would disagree publicly. And when fundamental constants stop agreeing, physics stops being predictive. That's when the systems designed to protect civilization would begin to fail quietly. GPS accuracy would degrade. High-frequency trading systems would experience synchronization errors. Power grids, systems that rely on precise timing, would see instability. Not blackouts, just anomalies, enough to demand workarounds. Enough to normalize dysfunction. The planet wouldn't feel like it was breaking. It would feel like it was slipping. And humanity would do what it always does in the face of slow collapse. It would optimize around the damage, instead of asking why the rules were changing. There wouldn't be a day when gravity failed. There would be a day when fixing it stopped being possible. By the time scientists agreed something fundamental was wrong, Earth would already be operating outside the assumptions it was built on. Models wouldn't be predicting outcomes anymore, they would be chasing them. The Moon's widening orbit would accelerate. Not dramatically, but decisively. Tidal forces would weaken. Ocean mixing would slow. Climate regulation systems that depended on lunar interaction would degrade. Earth wouldn't lose the Moon, but it would lose its stabilizing influence. And stability is not optional for complex life. The atmosphere would begin to leak, not as a violent escape, but as a persistent thinning. Lighter gases would rise beyond the planet's weakened grasp. Over decades, oxygen levels would decline just enough to matter. Cities at elevation would empty first, not from panic, from economics. Oxygen enrichment systems would become standard in hospitals, then offices, then homes. Architecture would adapt vertically, sealing environments instead of opening them. The sky would look the same, but breathing would feel expensive. Human physiology would change. Children born into weaker gravity would grow taller, with lower bone density and altered muscle development. Medical standards would adjust. What once was considered a disorder would become the new baseline. Space would no longer be up, it would be closer. Launch costs would drop. Orbital infrastructure would expand. Some would see this as opportunity, humanity finally slipping free of Earth's constraints. But escape wouldn't be universal. Those who could afford sealed habitats and orbital migration would adapt faster. Those who couldn't would remain in a world slowly losing its ability to hold them. Civilization wouldn't collapse, it would stratify. Eventually there would be a moment no one could observe directly, the point where Earth's gravity dropped below the threshold needed to keep the atmosphere bound over geological time. No alarm, no visual cue, just a planet committed to becoming lighter. At that point, reversing the process would be impossible. Gravity is not a machine you repair. It is a property of mass and space-time. To restore it, Earth would need more mass, a lot more, and adding a planet's worth of mass is not a solution. So humanity would do what it always does. It would rename the problem. Atmospheric management, adaptive habitation, orbital transition, words that make inevitability sound like progress. And generations later, children would ask why old books describe a sky thicker than the one they know, why oceans once reached farther inland, why people once walked with such heavy certainty. They would be told stories about a time when the planet held everything close, and gravity didn't let go. For more curiosities and mysteries of the universe, like and subscribe to the channel.